120 million records sold. 5 people navigating one of the most complicated working relationships in music history. An album widely described as a breakup record, recorded during a period when 2 of the band's couples were going through painful separations, in the same studio at the same time. A founder who named the band after others because he refused the spotlight, then struggled with severe mental illness in the years that followed. A guitarist removed from the band by phone call, who later sought legal remedy against his former bandmates. And a keyboardist, the emotional center of the whole thing, gone on November 30th, 2022, leaving behind a silence the remaining members have said they cannot imagine filling. Most people heard the harmonies. Far fewer understood what was happening behind them. The chaos was not despite the music. According to nearly every account from the people who were there, the chaos and the music were inseparable. And once you understand that, everything about this story changes. This is that story, Fleetwood Mac. Say it out loud. Most people hear that name and think of Stevie Nicks spinning in a black shawl. They think of Dreams and Go Your Own Way and sold-out stadiums and one of the most acclaimed rock albums of the 1970s. But here is what rarely gets discussed. The name itself contains a meaningful choice. Peter Green, the man who built this band from nothing, refused to put his own name on it. He named it after the drummer and the bassist, not himself. By most accounts, he did it as a gesture of inclusion, a signal that this was something shared rather than something he owned. That decision, that refusal to center himself, it is one of the most revealing things about Peter Green, and it makes everything which followed all the more complicated. Because the band that eventually bore that name grew into something very different from what Green had envisioned. But none of them could have anticipated that in the summer of 1967, not yet, nobody expected anything from Peter Green. He was a young man from the East End of London, born Peter Greenbaum in October 1946. He had shortened his surname, not for fame, simply to navigate his environment more easily. His world was ordinary, and the one thing that set him apart was his guitar. In 1966, he found himself replacing Eric Clapton in John Mayall's Blues Breakers. Fellow musicians gave him the nickname the Green God, a deliberate echo of Clapton's own reputation. That detail is well documented. Peter Green, at around 20 years old, was spoken of by peers as being in the same class as Eric Clapton. But Green, by most accounts, was not chasing that kind of recognition. He was interested in building something real. One night in the summer of 1967, Green was given access to Decca Studios in London after hours by John Mayall. He brought 2 friends, drummer Mick Fleetwood and bassist John McVie. They recorded a handful of tracks. Green wrote a name on the tape box, Fleetwood Mac. He named the band after the rhythm section, not himself. Mick Fleetwood later reflected on this, saying that Green could have been the stereotypical superstar control freak, but that was not his style. He named the band after the bass player and the drummer, and that said everything about who he was. By 1968, their debut album reached the top 5 in the UK and remained on the charts for 37 weeks. They had a UK #1 with the instrumental Albatross, followed by Man of the World and Oh Well. Within roughly 3 years, Peter Green had built one of the most critically respected bands in Britain, and then he stepped away from all of it. His mental state, according to those around him, had been changing for some time. And what happened to Peter Green in the period that followed is, in many ways, where this story truly begins. Because the pressures that overwhelmed him would resurface in different forms for decades to come. The years between 1970 and 1974 are often glossed over in accounts of Fleetwood Mac. They should not be. They explain a great deal about what came after. Peter Green left Fleetwood Mac in May 1970. His departure was not clean or simple. He had, by multiple accounts, never fully recovered from taking spiked LSD at a gathering in Munich. His behavior had become increasingly erratic. He reportedly sent letters to the band's management demanding they stop earning royalties on his behalf. He grew increasingly withdrawn from the commercial world he had built. He became, in the words of people who knew him, a deeply changed person. And then, less than a year later, something equally disorienting happened. While the band was on a US tour in February 1971, guitarist Jeremy Spencer told the group he was stepping out briefly. He did not return. After a search lasting several days, the band learned that Spencer had joined a religious movement called the Children of God. He had walked away without warning, mid-tour. 2 founding members, gone within a period of roughly a year. The remaining core, Mick Fleetwood, John McVie, Christine McVie, and a series of other musicians spent the next several years simply holding the band together. The situation was made more difficult by a legal dispute with their former manager, Clifford Davis, who claimed ownership of the Fleetwood Mac name. This led to a situation in 1974, where a separate group toured the United States under the Fleetwood Mac name without any of the original members. The actual band pursued legal action to reclaim their identity, though the process was prolonged and difficult. It was in this environment that the real Fleetwood Mac continued to work. By the time American guitarist Bob Welch departed in 1974, the band had reached number 34 on the Billboard Hot 200 with Heroes Are Hard to Find, their highest U.S. chart position to date. After 7 years of constant change and upheaval, number 34, that was where they stood. And then, in December 1974, something shifted. Mick Fleetwood was scouting recording studios in Los Angeles. At a facility called Sound City, he asked the house engineer to play him something. The engineer played a track called Frozen Love from an album called Buckingham Nicks. Fleetwood was impressed. He was introduced to the guitarist Lindsey Buckingham, who happened to be at Sound City that day. Fleetwood asked him to join Fleetwood Mac. Buckingham agreed on one condition. His musical partner and girlfriend, Stevie Nicks, had to be part of the arrangement. He was not willing to join without her. On New Year's Eve 1974, Buckingham and Nicks officially joined Fleetwood Mac. The resulting self-titled album, released in 1975, spent 58 weeks reaching number 1 on the Billboard 200. It produced 3 top 20 singles, Rhiannon, Over My Head, and Say You Love Me. A band that had been struggling for years suddenly had one of the biggest selling albums in America. But something worth noting, the chemistry that made this lineup work was built substantially on personal bonds, romantic relationships, real connections between real people who were also professional collaborators, which meant that when those relationships began to change, the foundation would be tested in ways that few working environments are ever tested. For a period in 1975 and into 1976, from the outside, the band appeared to be functioning extraordinarily well. Buckingham was widely described, including by his bandmates, as a ferociously dedicated musical architect in the studio. Nicks brought an instinctive, poetic approach to songwriting that complemented his precision. Christine McVie provided warmth and emotional directness in both her music and her presence within the group. John McVie was, by most accounts, the steady rhythmic backbone. And Mick Fleetwood held the collective together through a combination of personal loyalty and force of will. From the outside, they looked like a well-functioning unit. But according to band members' own later accounts, the relentless touring that followed the 1975 album took a significant toll on their personal lives. John and Christine McVie, who had been married for 8 years, separated and ultimately divorced. They reportedly kept their professional interactions focused strictly on the music. Buckingham and Nicks, whose relationship had been intermittent and complicated for years, were also going through a painful period. And Mick Fleetwood was dealing with the discovery that his wife had been involved with someone close to him. 3 sets of personal difficulties, all unfolding at once, among 5 people who shared a stage every night. And none of them stopped working. They went directly into the studio. And what they recorded there would become one of the best-selling albums of that era. February 1976, Record Plant Studios, Sausalito, California. By the time the band arrived to record what became Rumours, the relationship breakdowns were either complete or actively occurring. Buckingham and Nicks were no longer a couple. The McVies were in the process of divorcing. Mick Fleetwood was working through his own domestic difficulties. And all of them came to the studio and made music together. Buckingham later described the situation in interviews, noting that when 2 couples within the same band break up, there is normally some distance and time to allow things to settle. They did not have that. They went into a studio together, and the songs they wrote reflected exactly what they were living. He described the songs as dialogues, each member writing directly to and about the others, in real time, in a shared space. Everyone in that studio understood the subject matter of what was being recorded. Buckingham also said in various interviews that he had not been the one to end the relationship with Nicks. He described the lack of closure as something he carried through the recording process. The absence of distance meant the wound never had a chance to close. That dynamic, Her departure, his unresolved feelings, and the forced proximity of the studio runs through Rumours in ways that are audible to anyone who knows the context. Go your own way. Buckingham wrote it about Nicks, and by his own account, it came out of raw, barely processed emotion. The lyric containing the line about packing up and shacking up was one Nicks took issue with. She said in interviews that it was an unfair characterization. Buckingham, according to multiple accounts, declined to change it. And yet Nicks then performed backup vocals on that very song, every night on tour for years. She later described in interviews how difficult it was to sing those words repeatedly. She said the experience was painful, and that she felt Buckingham understood the effect it had on her. Meanwhile, Nicks wrote Dreams as what many have described as her counterpoint. She has said she wrote it quickly, reportedly in around 10 minutes, alone in a room at the record plant. Where his song carried anger, hers had a quality of calm acceptance. Buckingham is recalled being handed the cassette by Nicks and listening to it. By his own account, despite the tensions between them, he recognized immediately that the song was something special. That contrast, raw fury on one side, measured stillness on the other, is one of the things that gives Rumours its particular emotional texture. Christine McVie wrote You Make Loving Fun about a new relationship she had developed during this period, reportedly with the band's lighting director. She has said in interviews that she told John McVie the song was about her dog in an effort to avoid additional conflict during an already difficult time. Record plant co-owner Chris Stone later described the recording environment as intense and unconventional. The band would gather in the evenings. The atmosphere was social and often chaotic, and the actual recording frequently happened deep into the night. Christine McVie, when asked about the Rumours sessions, described them with a single word: trauma. On February 4th, 1977, Rumours was released. The public response was extraordinary. The album topped charts for over 30 weeks and has sold more than 40 million copies worldwide, making it one of the best-selling albums in recording history. But success at that scale brought its own pressures. The band was now required to perform this material together, night after night, in front of audiences of thousands. The personal content of the songs did not become less personal simply because millions of people were now listening. Pause here for a second and think about this. Do you believe an album like Rumours could have been made without the circumstances that produced it? Or does the music only exist because of what these people were going through? Drop your answer in the comments. Grammy Award for Album of the Year, February 1978, Rumours won. 5 people who had spent the better part of a year recording some of the most personal material of their lives stood on that stage together. It was, by any measure, a significant moment of recognition. And yet the tensions documented during the recording had not resolved with success. Buckingham and Nicks were navigating a complicated professional relationship that had grown out of a painful personal one. The McVies were working together after a divorce. Mick Fleetwood was managing the collective, as well as his own private difficulties. The touring required them to perform this emotionally charged material together repeatedly, which band members have described as an experience that was, at times, genuinely difficult. Dreams has now passed 2 billion plays on Spotify. In September 2020, a video posted by Nathan Apodaca while skateboarding to the song went widely shared online. Within a week, streaming numbers for the track increased by around 125%, and the song returned to the Billboard Hot 100 for the first time in roughly 3 decades. The recordings have outlasted the circumstances that produced them. That is, in some ways, the most remarkable thing about what Fleetwood Mac built. The history of Fleetwood Mac after Rumours is not a single collapse. It is a series of departures and reunions that stretched across more than 3 decades. Lindsey Buckingham departed in 1987, citing creative differences. The band continued, bringing in 2 guitarists to replace him. Stevie Nicks pursued solo work from around 1990. Christine McVie reduced her involvement in the mid-1990s. The classic lineup reunited for Bill Clinton's inauguration in 1993. His campaign had used Don't Stop as its theme. A full reunion tour in 1997, documented on the live album The Dance, was commercially successful and introduced the band to a new generation of listeners. The chemistry that had defined the mid-1970s lineup had not disappeared. But chemistry, as members of the band eventually acknowledged in interviews, is not the same as compatibility. By 2018, that distinction became the central issue. January 2018, New York City. A Music Cares benefit concert during Grammy weekend. Fleetwood Mac were being honored. According to accounts from both sides, the evening was the beginning of the end of Buckingham's time in the band. Nicks took issue with his behavior before their set and with what she perceived as a dismissive gesture during her acceptance remarks. Buckingham, in subsequent interviews, said he believed she had been looking for a reason to force a change, and that this event gave her one. Nicks reportedly gave the band an ultimatum. Either Buckingham left, or she would. The remaining members chose to continue without Buckingham. On March 8, 2018, Buckingham was informed by phone that he was no longer in the band. Mick Fleetwood, speaking to Rolling Stone, said the band had arrived at an impasse, a situation where continuing with Buckingham was not possible. He said the decision was made collectively and that majority ruled. Buckingham, speaking to CBS, said he was not particularly troubled by missing another touring cycle. What he said he found genuinely painful was the sense that the legacy the band had built together, one he described as being about rising above exactly this kind of conflict, was being undermined by the way things had ended. He filed a lawsuit in Los Angeles Superior Court, seeking damages he said reflected what he had been told he would earn from the planned North American tour, a figure reported to be in the range of $12 to $14 million. A settlement was reached in December 2018. The terms were not disclosed. In the aftermath, Christine McVie reportedly wrote to Buckingham directly. According to accounts that have since been reported publicly, she told him she had had no part in the decision, that she missed him, and that she believed Nicks, at some level, would want him to return. Christine had long occupied a particular role within the band, someone both sides could talk to, a point of stability in a group defined by its instability. With that role gone from the dynamic, something fundamental had shifted. Christine Ann McVie died on November 30th, 2022, following a stroke. She was 79 years old. Reports indicated she had also been dealing with metastatic cancer. The band issued a statement describing her as one of a kind, talented beyond measure, the best musician any band could have, and the best friend anyone could have in their life. Stevie Nicks wrote a personal tribute in which she described Christine as her closest friend in the world from the first day of 1975, the day Nicks joined the band, until her death. 47 years. Nicks later spoke to Mojo magazine about the circumstances of Christine's passing. She described receiving a call, wanting to travel to be with her, and being advised by Christine's family that there was not time. The next day, Christine was gone. Nicks said she had wanted to sit beside her and sing to her. She said she did not get to say goodbye. Mick Fleetwood performed Songbird at the Grammy Awards the following February, accompanied by Bonnie Raitt and Sheryl Crow. Afterwards, speaking to reporters, he said the loss of Christine represented a line in the sand for the band. He said that using the word done felt premature given how many times they had said it before, but that continuing felt unthinkable. Stevie Nicks was more direct in her own comments. She said that without Christine, there was no path forward for Fleetwood Mac in any form. Regarding Buckingham, when asked whether a reconciliation might still be possible, Nicks noted that he had undergone emergency open-heart surgery in 2019, the year after his departure from the band, and that the procedure had resulted in some temporary vocal cord damage. She expressed uncertainty about whether extended touring would be realistic for him. The band has not performed together since. Members have indicated in interviews that a reunion is unlikely. The music, however, has not stopped reaching people. The chain crossed 1 billion streams on Spotify. Dreams surpassed 2 billion. A generation that was not alive when Rumours was recorded is encountering these songs now and finding something in them that speaks to their own experience. Some listeners have described finding comfort in the album's acknowledgement that people can go through genuinely difficult things and still create something meaningful. To the listener, the music resolves. It arrives. It stays. The picture is more complicated for the people who made it. Peter Green, who founded the band and gave it its name rather than claiming it for himself, died in July 2020. The decades before his death had been marked by severe mental illness. By the late 1980s, he had largely withdrawn from public life. A television interview in 1988 showed a man who no longer owned a guitar. He died having watched the band he created become one of the most famous acts in music history. A band that bore the names of his friends, built on his generosity and his vision, that had continued for 5 decades without him. Danny Kirwan, the guitarist who joined in 1968 and was let go in 1972 following a period of erratic behavior linked to alcohol use, died in June 2018. He spent most of his later years in relative obscurity, largely absent from the official story. Bob Welch, the American guitarist who joined in 1971 and played a significant role in keeping the band alive through its most unstable years, the period that made the Rumours era possible, was not included in Fleetwood Mac's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction in 1998. A prior legal dispute over unpaid royalties is widely believed to have been a factor. Welch died in 2012. 3 people who shaped the band's history in foundational ways, none of whom received the kind of recognition that the Rumours-era lineup received. The official narrative simplified over time, as official narratives tend to do. The fuller picture involves around 19 members across 6 decades. Legal disputes over the band's name, mental illness, the loss of key members to religious movements, personal crises, and creative disagreements. A manager who tried to take ownership of the band's identity. 2 divorces played out in real time in a recording studio. A phone call that ended a 40-year working partnership. An undisclosed legal settlement. Emergency cardiac surgery. And then, quietly on November 30th, 2022, a stroke. Here is the question that sits at the center of all of this. The thing that made Fleetwood Mac extraordinary, the emotional honesty in the recordings, the specificity of the pain in the lyrics, the tension that runs through every track on Rumours, was not incidental to the music. By most accounts from the people who made it, it was the source of the music. The separations gave the songs their subject matter. The unresolved feelings between Buckingham and Nicks gave the chain its particular tension. The rawness in Christine McVie's writing came, at least in part, from what she was living through. But that kind of emotional exposure has a cost, and it is a cost that cannot be sustained indefinitely. Peter Green understood something like this in 1970. He tried to walk away before the weight of it overwhelmed him. Based on everything documented about what happened to him in the years that followed, it overwhelmed him anyway. Decades later, the same dynamics, the pressure of fame, questions of creative control, the complexity of long-term personal and professional entanglement led to the phone call on March 8, 2018. And then Christine McVie, who had been the emotional equilibrium of the band for nearly 50 years, was gone on November 30th, 2022. Mick Fleetwood has reflected in various interviews on what Peter Green meant by naming the band after the rhythm section. He has suggested that Green may have intended the name as a way of ensuring the band could survive beyond any single person, that the name belonged to something larger than any one member. It did survive for 55 years, through approximately 19 members, through deaths and divorces and lawsuits and extended periods of inactivity and a settlement whose terms remain sealed to this day. Whether that survival honored what Green originally intended is a question members of the band have themselves grappled with in interviews. What seems clear from the outside is that they built something that none of them could have built alone. The combination of those particular people, at that particular moment, produced recordings that have reached billions of listeners across half a century. Band members have suggested in interviews that such a period could not be recreated. That whatever existed between those 5 people in that studio in Sausalito in 1976 was a product of specific circumstances that no longer exist and cannot be reassembled. Whether they understood that while they were living it, that is harder to say. Have you ever been part of something that only worked because of exactly who was in the room? A band, a team, a creative partnership. Something where the combination was the thing, and without any single piece of it, the whole stopped making sense. Fleetwood Mac had that for the better part of 5 decades. Members have described, in various ways, both the extraordinary nature of what they shared and the toll it took. Here is the question worth sitting with. Was it worth it? The recordings that will outlast everyone who made them. The audiences of tens of millions. The Grammy. The legacy. Was it worth what it cost the people involved personally? That is not a question with a clean answer. And the people who made those records have given different answers at different points in their lives. What do you think? If you have a perspective on that, put it in the comments. And if this kind of storytelling is what you are looking for, subscribe. There are more stories like this one.